Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's. At Local Joe's, we help local business. Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's.
This is City Pulse Newsmakers, a weekly look at the issues and the people behind them in Greater Lansing. Brought to you by City Pulse, Lansing's weekly alternative newspaper. And now, here's your host, City Pulse publisher, Burl Schwartz.
Good morning. Our topic today is politics, and who better to kick that around with than our guest today was Press Secretary to Republican Governor John Engler. And while he makes his living in public relations now, everybody knows he's a go-to guy in the highest circles as well as among journalists like me. John Truscott, welcome to City
Glad
Pulse.
to be here.
John, let's talk about the presidential campaign, and let's talk about the horse race first.
Sure.
So as we look at it less than 4 weeks out, is it over?
Maybe it's on life support. I don't think it's quite over yet. I think this is one of those cycles that we've had so many surprises that have come out of nowhere, and things have gone back and forth for many, many months. Who knows what might happen in the next week or two? It's too unpredictable. But I think from an electoral college standpoint, it's really tough for Hillary Clinton to lose. Just things are stacked going in her favor. So, you could have that one October surprise that comes against her really hard, is a revelation of earth-shattering proportions. I don't think that'll happen, but this far out, you kind of always go, there's that one little chance, so you never say never.
If the Republicans had gone with a more moderate candidate like John Kasich, would enough mud that's been thrown at Hillary have stuck, you think?
I think this would be a completely different race because, one, when you're throwing things back and forth, how does a candidate react? Hillary Clinton has really not had to defend herself too strongly. She's been able to stay on offense most of the time. So when you're on defense, that's when candidates make mistakes. You say things maybe inappropriately. The media counts that against you, and that has a lingering effect. So I think when you look at the 17 different candidates that were there, I would say you could probably pick half of them, and they would have run a very credible, strong campaign against Hillary Clinton. This would be a much different race today, and the Republicans might be in the lead at that point, because if we really go back and dissect the Clinton campaign early on, it was a terrible campaign. Flailing around, not on message. She's, I think, got her footing in the last couple of weeks, and part of that is because the Trump campaign has been so bad. It's allowed her to kind of catch up and get back on offense. But this would be a totally different election year had it been a Kasich or a Rubio, or take your pick from any one of half a dozen of them.
Trump obviously is just simply outrageous, but is he worse than outrageous?
Well, on one hand, he's kind of a symbol of the broadcast media today, and I'm talking the TV shows, not the news. He created a reality TV show. Reality TV shows are thriving. Sometimes they're brash, they're out there. You have to do things that are going to get a lot of attention, so you don't necessarily adhere to the norms that people have subscribed to. I do think he's definitely out there. Is not a normal candidate, and I think the public was looking for somebody different. Somebody who wasn't a typical politician, somebody who could shake things up. I think they got too much of it. I think it went too far in somebody like him. I think there are other folks. Even a Ted Cruz, with all of his faults, would have been a little more in the mold, but would have run a much better, tighter campaign.
Republicans, if those who still have to make up their minds, and it's hard to believe, by the way, when I see these people, how can you not have made up your mind?
Yeah, who are these undecideds out there? How can you be undecided? But when you look at it, in reality, most people have lives, and they're with their kids, they're with their families, so they're not really zeroing in until well after Labor Day. You get the kids back to school, you kind of settle back into the normal routine, and that's when you start really looking at who the candidates are and what's going on. So it's not uncommon to kind of take that September time frame to say, hey, let's size things up. I really want to be educated and learn. And then October is when they start to really solidify their opinion. So, people who follow this stuff and love to comment on it, yeah, we're watching it from the beginning, the first debates in New Hampshire, really early on. But it's really now when people are solidifying and making up their minds.
And I've got to believe that Republicans like you have to be really weighing a lot of tough moral issues here when it comes to, well, I'm a Republican. I'm supposed to vote for this guy, but it's Donald Trump.
Well, I look at it, and I think the same thing happened on the Democratic side. Donald Trump is not a Republican. He had not been involved in the party. He had never, not only run for anything, but never was a delegate or did anything really with the party. He was a business person, and I can respect business people who choose to get involved, but to say that he had been a Republican, he had never been involved in the party, just like Bernie Sanders had never been involved in the Democratic Party. And I still believe I don't believe he's a member. He never officially signed up. So this is one of those years that those outsiders came in. There was frustration among the electorate on both sides of the aisle with the establishment, the people who had been there, and they were looking for something different. Both parties got it to the extreme. The Democrats just did a better job of picking the candidate who would come through, who would be a little more rational.
So are you sympathetic to, they say a quarter of Republicans in Congress say they're not supporting their candidate. Are you sympathetic to these people?
I am. When you look at people who have been involved in the party and put their blood, sweat, and tears in it, this is not the party that they've been part of. And they're not ready to quite leave it yet. Hoping that things will come back and reset after this election. But if this continues for another cycle or two, you'll have a lot of those people, I think, walking away from the party and deciding to do something else. I think what's happened with the party is there has been a very small minority of people who came into the party who were sympathetic with Republican views, and they co-opted it at a time because the primary was so spread out. And so it allowed that minority vote, the minority members who may not or may have been members of the party, actually come up and get their candidate through. If there had only been 4 or 5 people early on in this primary, Trump would not be the nominee today. And I think that's a fault of the people who are running. Some people who are, by all means, good people, but not credible enough to run for the office of president. They should be running for something else. So, a Ben Carson, who is a great surgeon, has a lot of really good, interesting ideas, is not a guy who can go right from being surgeon to president of the United States. It's just not the way things happen. So there were people in there that took away votes from folks who were more credible and more normal. And I think I can say that because this is one of the years that there's a lot of abnormal things happening.
Is there a fix for that?
It has to. I think there has to be a lot of soul searching in the party to get there. And I'll reflect back to when then Governor Bush ran for president. It was really the governors across the country, the Republican governors, who selected him to run. And I was at this meeting, and all staff were actually kicked out when this discussion started to take place. It was at a meeting of Republican governors in Washington, and John Engler and Tommy Thompson, a few others walked in, and John Engler was chair of the Republican governors then, and he said, look, if we're going to take back the White House after the Bill Clinton era, the next leader of our party is going to come from this room. We have to. And there were a lot of really bright, really progressive governors in a sense that they were leading their states in ways that hadn't been done before. And the governors all looked at George W. Bush and said, you're the guy. And they all rallied around him and took their political organizations in their states and said, he's our guy. So it pretty much said to the establishment, there's no room for anybody else in this cycle to run. We're in charge now. And I think the Republican Party needs that type of leadership of people who are leaders in their communities and states to say, this is the direction we're going to take this back, and this is our person, and we're going to unite very early behind that person.
Now, there was talk that was going to be Jeb Bush this time around.
Yeah.
What happened to him?
I think the political wins kind of passed him by. He, by all means, was a very good governor. I've talked to people who were Democrats in Florida who said he was a great guy. He worked across the aisle. He was smart. He invited people in. He was very inclusive. I think the political timing was definitely off. 8 years ago, if he were to run, it would have been a different time. People were more accepting of the establishment. The campaign was less bombastic, and Bush's experience would have been viewed more positively. This was just a cycle where people are angry, and they're looking for somebody who's going to voice or be an outlet for that anger, where they can go, yeah, you're right, and get fired up, not thinking about, okay, at some point you have to govern if you win. And making that transition is very difficult.
Now, the Democrats, of course, they may get away from this, but after George McGovern, they went to this superdelegate system. And had Bernie Sanders done somewhat better this time around, he might have been denied the nomination because of these superdelegates. Sure. Is there a fix like that the Republicans need to look at?
There is. I think within the party, people would rebel against that because then again, it's the establishment kind of putting in the fix. And I don't think it would go over well. I think it's more you need to unite early behind a person. And we've never been a party that really allowed leadership in the party, the chairman, the committee folks, to say, this is our person, everybody else get out of the way. It hasn't been done like that. It's more you get your grassroots organizations all set up and backing a person. So I do think, one of my favorite phrases I like to say is we can snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. This is one of those cycles where I do think Hillary Clinton was very, very beatable with a good, credible candidate. We didn't step up to the challenge as Republicans. And if we don't learn from it, we're going to be marginalized for many years to come.
And, I realize you're on the Republican side of things, but let's look at Hillary. So she's not a great candidate, but yet they say she gets high scores when she's actually in a job as Secretary of State, as a senator. Assuming there is no further October surprise to her detriment, she's going to be president. How's she going to do?
I think it's too early to tell. I think she's not a good candidate, but she's surrounded by very credible people who know how to run campaigns, who know how to organize, who know how to launch the grenades and the missiles at very strategic times. They're very good at managing that side of it. And the Clinton, her husband, their campaign was the same way. It's a lot of the same people. They know what they're doing. As far as president, and I don't think President Obama has done it, and you'll hear from Democrats in Congress, he didn't bring people in to the fold to unite them, to really work with the Congress. I think if she can go in and be constructive and open and willing to work with the Congress, I think Republicans will extend an opportunity for her to get some things done and be willing to work with her. She's certainly not her husband. He was the master at bringing people together and pushing issues through. So if she kind of takes the lead from how he did it, I think she could be somewhat successful. I think part of it depends on how quickly a Supreme Court nominee comes forward, because that will, I think, put a halt to everything for a certain period of time as that's fought out.
Of course, the Democrats are hoping that the down ticket damage is enough that they will win back the Senate. What are your thoughts? Do you see people staying home? Republicans are saying, I can't vote for this guy, I'm just not going to vote?
No, I think Republicans will turn out. I think that the issue for Democrats is the thought is that she's going to run away with it, so what's the motivation to turn out and show up? So does it depress turnout just because she's so far ahead? That could be a factor. I do think Republicans will show up. I think Republicans are looking to kind of save the party down ballot. There's a factor in national electoral politics that we like an equilibrium or a balance. We don't want one party to have total control of everything. So you kind of vote one party here and then offset it over here. Michigan has been a really big state to do that. If you look at state legislature, other statewide offices, we can go for a Democrat for president or even governor, but then we switch back over and vote the other way for the legislature or for Congress. So I do think people still turn out. I think the Senate is in a very precarious position as far as flipping back to the Democrats. I do think Republicans hold on to the House as a little bit of balance. But then you're always planning 2 years ahead for the next election cycle. Those off cycles are not good for the party of the incumbent president. So that's when I think Republicans regroup and say, okay, what can we do? What candidates do we have? And how can we start planning for 2 more years?
We've got now, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a high percentage of Republicans in Congress walking away from Trump, but we've seen a few come back. Senator Thune reversed himself, several House members. Paul Ryan has put himself on this tightrope out there that, well, I'm not going to campaign for him anymore, but I'm not denouncing him. Your field is public relations. What would you be telling people facing that difficulty?
I really think Paul Ryan did the right thing when you look at his responsibility as a leader of a broad group with people who are keeping with the endorsement and people who are walking away. He does have a very difficult line to walk, and I think he did it pretty well. And I also saw the RNC just put out a pretty well done video with Paul Ryan talking about this is what it means to be a conservative and really laying out the issues. This is what we believe in. And it was really well done. And these were all captured from talks that he's given mainly to kids who look like they were college age. So I think he's a really good leader at the right time when you kind of need somebody who is known as fairly conservative but can work across the aisle as well and is known as a decent person. He's kind of the person that can, I think, help save the party. But going forward, he's got a very tough job, and he will lead the regrouping of the party after this is all done, and I think it'll start right away in December.
And some people say, well, this is the end of the Republican Party. Now, I'm old enough to remember Barry Goldwater, and on the Democratic side, Walter Mondale. Is there serious damage to the party in the long run, or is this just a short-term problem?
It's a short-term problem unless we allow it to be a long-term problem. If we nominate another person like Trump, who isn't from the party, kind of runs against when you just look at some of the comments that he's made against some of the elected leaders who didn't step up and support him right away, you don't attack your own. You don't have to like them, but you don't outright attack them, and that's one of the issues that I have here with the Trump campaign. I do think the party can put it back together. I think you need new blood, some new people to come in, some new leaders, younger leaders who have a different perspective, and also, there are a lot of younger Republicans who are fiscally very conservative, socially a little more moderate, and I think there's room to grow that wing of the party, and I think that's where probably a majority of the American people are. So, it's where do we move as a party to take in some of those issues, be a little broader, and that's how you rebuild.
Right, and so what are those issues? Where does you think the Republican Party need to broaden itself?
I think part of it is just explaining how we believe in personal responsibility and providing you with the opportunity to chart your own destiny. And I think we really need to explain that. When you look at millennials coming up and some of the issues, they want to contribute, be part of society, do good for people. And that really is the Republican mantra in allowing people to chart their own destiny and do things that are positive for their community. I don't think as a party we've really tapped into that. We haven't explained that that's what we're all about and that our view is very welcoming. It's less government intervention, but more getting involved and allowing people to step up and help. It's volunteerism, it's community service and things like that. And that's where younger people really are. And when you look at the jobs that they're looking for, they want to make an impact on their community. And if you're not providing that in your world of employment, they're going to move on to somebody else.
But now people can say with some justification that regardless of whether he is a Republican, he got the Republican nomination.
Mm-hmm.
And he got it by making outrageous statements, anti-American statements, really, when it comes to Muslims. This idea of this wall, the sort of thing that people would say, hey, he's a bigot, and the Republican Party endorsed him. Doesn't the Republican need to party? Plus, how do you survive as the party that Hispanics are going to turn out and vote against?
Well, if there are a couple factors there. First, people have very short memories. It's what's next, what's coming up next. So I think we get past this pretty easily.
But do they have such short memories? I mean, look at the Democratic Party before Kennedy, before he got Martin Luther King out of jail. A high percentage of blacks voted Republican. They don't anymore.
Well, and I'll point to Bill Clinton and what he did to restore, after Mondale and all the debacles, he said we have to be more mainstream as a party. And he went to a lot of the governors who, these are the people who are leading in their states day to day, making the tough decisions. And so what Clinton did is said, we're going to form a moderate wing of the party, and he expanded that base and attracted a lot of people to it, attracted a lot of governors to it. The Republicans need to do the same thing with their party in getting a little more mainstream and letting people know what they're for, instead of just throwing the bombs and being bombastic and the outlandish rhetoric. It's there that the leaders are there. When you look at the Republican governors who have been elected, they're very popular. They're making tough decisions. They're making the right decisions for their states. Their economies are growing. Those are the type of people you look to as the next generation of leaders. And if you do, it can rebound very quickly.
But now we've got Mike Pence, who has come out. If there's a silver lining, I guess you've got at least somebody who looks like he's going to come out landing on his feet. But is he representative of the Republican Party of the future?
Probably not the future. I think he's representative of the more mainstream part of the party right now. He's a very decent person. He's been a great governor. I think this is the big tragedy in the race, is that he's not running for re-election. Mm-hmm. He gave that up to run on the Trump ticket. So we kind of lose him.
But he's not mainstream. I mean, he may be mainstream for the Republican Party, but he's
that's
mainstream for America.
He's mainstream for the party, but he's also a strong leader, and he's the type of guy who easily works across the aisle and is a well-liked person. Maybe not every decision is well-liked, but he's seen as somebody who is, he'll sit down with you and negotiate and try to work through the differences. And he's a very calming influence when you have difficult fights and political battles. So,
is he going to be tainted?
Yeah. Well, and plus he's not going to have an office to run from. Mm-hmm. And I think the next cycle you're going to need a natural constituency or base, some sort of elective office or some bully pulpit, one way or another, so you get the publicity, you can go out and travel and have a legitimate calling. Remember, he was talking about getting in the race very early on in this cycle, and some things happened that knocked him out. Otherwise, he may have been the type that could have come through, or he would have just muddied it even more, and we would have had 18, 19, 20 people in, and Trump would have come up through easily. Right. You can kind of Monday morning quarterback this, but I don't think anybody really knows, except this is what we're stuck with.
I want to talk to you about another topic you're very familiar with, which is the media. I've heard any number of people say, why do the media give Trump such credence? And my response has been, because he's the leading candidate. He's now the Republican candidate. Yeah. But have the media overall done a good job, or have they fallen down on the job?
I think overall they've done a very good job, probably a better job in this cycle than many of the other past ones. Trump has kind of, I said months ago, rewritten the campaign rule book on how to get elected. Now, I think it's by sheer force of personality and outrageousness, but when you don't know what he's going to say when he calls his next event or puts out his next tweet, you have to cover that as a member of the media, because you just don't know. It's that unpredictable. People are clamoring for it. So Trump is feeding the media beast pretty well. Now it's boomeranged against him. Right. He went too far, right. and now the stage is much bigger. The lights are much hotter on him, and it got out of his control. But I think leading up to it, he was a master at making sure. I mean, when you look at, he didn't have the money to spend on paid media, but he got so much earned media, he blew everybody else out of the water. I don't think we'll have a candidate like that again, just because you don't have that type of big personality out there anywhere that I'm aware of.
Or does somebody say, I'm going to be the next Donald Trump and develop along the same lines?
You know, they could, but hopefully there's only one Donald Trump.
Yeah. Well, and that is the wonderful thing about politics. Who would have predicted Donald Trump a year ago? I mean, it was a sport.
That's one thing about all these prognostications that I issue. I always kind of give the caveat. I said, I've been completely wrong this entire cycle, so take it with a grain of salt. I thought he would have been knocked out, within the first couple of months. And then every primary, every debate, oh, this is it. He's done next week.
And does the media, though, if there is any fault to lay at the media's door, did they not go after him hard enough because they thought the same thing?
Yeah, probably. And I don't think they gave enough attention and then, by extension, credibility to some of the other candidates who were really credible, who were elected officials that had strong records that could have been a really good nominee. So I think there's some of that, but it's not necessarily their job to make that judgment call. You kind of put it out there and people make the decision on their own. And when you look at the primary process, every state is a little different in the way they either elect people or judge people that become the nominee. So I said early on, the media gave this a lot of coverage, a lot of very good coverage. It always gets more critical at the end because the stakes are higher, and you always get those October surprises that somebody's hanging on to, and that's when they trot it out there because that's when people pay attention.
Getting back to the down ticket effect, do you see any effect here in Michigan?
Sure. There are probably a couple of state house races where, if they're naturally within 50 or 100 votes, it could tip the other way because of turnout, because just any of a number of factors. So I don't see the House tipping from Republican to Democrat, but I think it could cost maybe an additional 3 seats or so for Republicans.
And of course then, what's coming up next is the governor's race. And that could be even affect that.
Yeah, I'd say that governor's race is already in full gear right now. They're out there meeting, raising money, and doing things. So that's already going, just a little bit under the radar.
Right. Well, before we let you go, we have a little bit of a surprise for you because I've got a spy. And she
gave my old yearbook
this today, and we're actually going to show people pictures from this as we go out. But talk about 1984. You really look the part.
Oh, it was a great year. I graduated from Lansing Sexton.
You're a Lansing guy. I didn't realize
that.
You
I was student council president at the time. I had a great time at Sexton.
I a few
years before.
Earlier.
I felt I had a great education. There were wonderful teachers there. I played football, was involved in a lot of activities. We really had a lot of fun. There were a lot of really good students who have gone on to great careers and been leaders, and still talk to a few of them. A lot of them are still around town. It was a really nice time.
Well, John, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thanks, Pearl. My pleasure.
Take care. Next week, John's partner at Truscott Rossman, Kelly Rossman, will be joining us. Have a great rest of your weekend.